Hello, everyone, and welcome. So, today, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be testing an application that I call APIFlow, and it's built in WebFlux. And yeah, that's going to be the objective for today. And as I'm testing this application called APIFlow, we'll get to know it in detail. So let's start with the testing because that's where I left last time. I've been recording, but I've been recording it um, just regular recording videos, not live. So I just decided to do it live instead. So like that, I don't have to keep on loading, preparing it. I might as well just do it in one shot. So let me start first by giving this command, start live, and then we're going to analyze the project using ChatGPT. So this is the latest version of the code. Well, actually, let me zip it again. Let me remove this. So this is the latest code. And we're gonna send to a compress zip driver. So let's grab this. Analyze current code and provide analyze current code and let's test its API to understand and let's understand its data flow. So I'm gonna open Postman. I don't know if I have it. Yeah, I have a Postman. Okay. I'm going to allow Postman. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new collection called API Flow. API Flow. So the code has been an okay, code analysis and API testing. Took me to the bottom. Let me go back up. A little slow. Code analysis and API testing plan for API Flow. Now that you have the latest version of the API Flow code base, we'll analyze its structure, test the API endpoints, and map the data flow to ensure everything is working as expected. Project structure review. We will begin by understanding the current state of the project by looking at the following: folder and package structure, key components, controllers, services, repositories, configuration files, application.yml or .properties, security implementation, OAuth2 or JWT, error handling and logging, resiliency mechanisms, circuit breakers, retry logic. API testing plan. To validate the API functionality, we will use the Postman or curl to test the API endpoints. I cannot move that. Check responses for expected behaviors. Identify any missing implementation or inconsistencies. Monitor logs and exceptions for debugging. Endpoints to test. So creates a new request, API request, and then an ID number. Fetches the request by ID. Another API with method get, API requests like multiple requests. Okay, retrieves all stored requests. delete API requests, and then by the ID, deletes a request by ID. Understand the data flow. To properly test and improve the API, we need to map the data flow from request to response. One, client sends API request, that is to say, post API requests. Controller processes the request and invokes the service layer. Service layer applies business logic and interacts with the repository. Repository saves, retrieves data from MongoDB. Response is returned to the client with appropriate status code. Create a simple text diagram for the data flow, just in case to make it easier. Run the application and test the APIs. Yes, we're going to do that. Identify any failures, missing logic, or needed improvements. Document issues. Okay, yeah, I want that. And then now proceed to analyze the code and verify the API functionality. iTunes. So we had the client, which is going to make a API request, and then that's going to be service by the controller in our application. Then the service layer will perform. Okay, I see this logic. The API request supposed to send us a response back, but before it could do that, the controller process the data. No, okay, the service layer. Well, it does in the service layers. We usually perform the business logic, and the repository does a database query. Okay, the MongoDB does a database query analysis, business logic process data response sent. I will now analyze the latest code base. Check for potential issues. Okay, yes, it's gonna check for see if we have any issues and analyze the code. Code structure review. The project follows a clean controller service repository architecture. Controller layer handles incoming API requests and routes them to the service layer. Service layer implements business logic, codes the repository, integrates resiliency mechanisms, that is to say, circuit breakers. Repository layer manages MongoDB database interactions, configuration files, defines essential settings like database connections and resiliency policies. Yeah, this is the same points we identify. Potential issues, API service tests, has unsolved imports. Yeah, I saw this issue before. Circuit breaking config is referenced but not defined in the code base. Yes, I noticed that too. MongoDB validation provider missing. Okay, I didn't know that, but okay. API starts successfully, MongoDB connects successfully, security password is auto-generated. Next step, API testing plan, objective to test each endpoint and validate expected responses. Check MongoDB connection. Let me first, let me run the application. No, not here. Let me install it. I'm gonna put the link of the repo in that video description once this is complete. If you see that we had some test cases running and it runs successfully. However, the issues that we're mentioning are in this file. See? Oh, now it resolved itself. Okay, perfect. Before they were not resolving themselves. Something, I don't know what happened. I'm gonna remove this because it looks, doesn't look like we are using it. Then just didn't make, just reorganizing, right? Use it import. So, okay, let's try to do a test of this. Check Mongo database connection. But I think for that we need to start it first, right? So let me start the application. Put in debugger mode. The application started, as you can see. API for application started successfully. So from this point, so do we open the terminal? Where's the terminal? Try using that command they provided us, paste. Nothing came up. I don't know where you're supposed to use that command. But I don't really care about that right now. I know it's starting and I want to test API with curl or postman, post request, the curl command. Let's try with this. Post request. How to test with a curl command. Let's continue API testing and results. Also, how to test that Mongo database connection. My main focus right now is to test with Postman. Your main focus is testing the API with Postman, but I will also include curl commands for reference. I'm opening Mongo Compass. How do I open the terminal here, though? Connections. Let's ignore that for now. Using the API with Postman. So we need to create open Postman, which we already have open. Test the API endpoints. So create a new request. We already created a new collection. We need to create a new request. So, all right, so we created this collection. Create a new request, and this is going to be a post request, it looks like. And let's start with a post request, and the path is this one, the application, which we can find in the controllers folder. Refactor kernel. No, I think I moved something by accident. Was moving something by accident. Okay, so API controller, we only have one endpoint, which is API request. No, API process. API process. Do we have requests here? This thing must be wrong. Okay. In the controller endpoints, I only see API slash process from, I think there is a mistake in your analysis. And you revisit. We'll delete that and let me try it again. Let's focus only on Postman. So here we're gonna have our HTTP local host, and then we are running in port 8080 API process. You're right. I will reanalyze the code base to check the actual available API endpoints and correct the testing process accordingly. We will focus entirely on Postman testing, yes. Okay, so our body, we look at the code, it's just expecting what? A request body, right? So if it goes through process, it's gonna consume XML and JSON requests, and it's gonna produce also the same thing, JSON and XML requests. And then this method process API requests. When we get the request, so we go to request, it has a string and it has a request data, an ID of type string, and a request data variable type of string, and they are placed in the collection requests in Mongo. So the request will look something like this. I will wait for this to complete. But there it is. That's the URL. Go to the header section. Then want us to ask content type application JSON. Let's save that. At request body. So the body is gonna be like that. Request ID. Then payload. Where are they getting this from? I don't think this is gonna work, but let me try. Raw. Even that error. Send the request. Send. Take the response. Use your response for the API. I think this is analyzing the code incorrectly because request looks like this. And response is a status response data. Analyze the request and response model objects. Actually, I'm using, that's probably why. Let me stop this. Let's use this one. O at O3, that's mini that high. This is great for coding and logic. It is true. It is. I noticed that it is actually much better with that. We analyze the code because the request and response uh, these are not matching. Case. Sometimes, uh, and let's just try ourselves. If we use ID, let's say ID is a string, right? So in the request data, we save it and we submit that. Still says forbidden. So because we have what to implement it already? No, we could do. Bloggers see what's happening. So why are we even hitting this? It should. Why is it request? So you notice you saw the how the request looks like. The model uses ID automatically generated as the primary key instead of a custom request ID. The key request data holds the payload, which aligns with what's currently being used in the code base. Indicates that for response, this indicates the status, processed or error. A descriptive message, response message, descriptive message, or data resulting from processing. The response model now uses response message instead of the earlier response. Yes, we're changing the fields. Now, there's the API endpoints because the IDs generate automatically, so we don't use it. That's the reason why. Okay. Post API process. JSON payload, for example. So let's try this. Let's see what happens. Uh, Expected SRC token cannot be found. Do we have authentication? That's probably why no authentication is required. So let's try it again. No, that don't work either. The expected response should include a status. Unit testing. Ensure that any unit tests referring to these keys, for example, get request data, get status, and get response message now compile and run successfully. Okay, I'm getting this error. When testing Postman, I am getting following. Uh, let's check also online. Doesn't promote anything. This guy added this. This class, we will not get CSRC error as we are using a Spring main application type equals reactive. Then we need to create a bin for WebFlux security. Previously, we used to do this in the web security enable web security class. Okay, we keep this in mind. Let's see what response we get here. Disabling CSRF protection for API endpoint is a common solution when using stateless authentication, such as OAuth 2, since CSRF tokens are mainly needed for session-based applications. Yes. For the reactive API like APIFlow, you can disable CSRF in your security configuration. Below is the updated version of the security configuration class to disable CSRF. We never had one, I think. Let me see. I don't see one. So let's create this file, which is gonna go under the config folder. Package, I mean. So this is the package. So let's copy this. Where's the code? Yeah. So it was similar to what we found online, right? Actually, this way looks way simpler. Security with filter chain. Let's copy this. Let's see. Reactive WebFlux security config. Enable web security config. Okay, let me check. Configuration, security config. Security web filter configuration, security web filter chain. For now, disable all type of security. We will implement those later. We go step by step. First, we want it to work. Know what to in JWT yet. What else do we need? I found this sample in the internet for a possible solution. Reactive Webflow security configuration for now. All security is disabled. And this got stuck. Below is the data security configuration that disables all security features. No OAuth2, no JWT, no CSRF protection for now. This allows all requests to pass through, which is useful for development and testing. Yes. Reactive Webflux security configuration. For now, all security is disabled to simplify development. So they're using enable WebFlux security annotation. Security web filter, Spring security filter chain. Authorize exchange any exchange, permit all. Okay, let's try this. It's very similar to what was here, right? So authorize exchange path matchers API authenticated. Any exchange permit all. Actually, it's very similar. The only thing we had extra was this. Let's see, provide full version. for security configuration best standards. Let's use this one then. Disabling CSRS is unnecessary for stateless APIs that use token-based authentication. Disabling it simplifies configuration and prevents issues with missing tokens during API calls. Endpoint authorization. That configuration secures the endpoints that start with API and then the wildcards, whatever else goes next, by requiring them to be authenticated while permitting other endpoints like public documentation without authentication. Configuration sets up a Spring security to validate incoming JWT tokens, enabling the API to function as an auth to resource service. Let me see. So, okay, so here is enabling everything. I didn't want it to do that. Require authentication. We don't want it to require authentication. Okay, let's just go with this one. I'll copy this style. 1 second. We don't want any security. The one that had two so slow. And file also. Okay, so we're gonna keep that name. Reactive WebFlux security config. I think yeah, it's fitting because we're gonna be enabling this. So I think it's a suitable name. And then security web filter chain. Yeah, I like it like that. Okay, so then it's saying authorize exchanges. Then it's saying exchanges that any exchange permit all of them. So let's clean and install. Build test is good. And now let's restart it. We put a debugger, so let's remove that. If we go to terminal, and that one though, application started successfully. Now this is hitting the endpoints. And now it came all the way through here, so that's promising. It actually hit the endpoint. So let me just let it go. So it finished. So it says, oh, something happened then after. But we did get a response. No, you get, why did we get that? But it said here, okay, received API requests, processing requests with data, hello, blah, blah. Error processing business logic, retries exhausted. 3 of 3. Okay, why are we getting this response? Three retries. So it performed, it went to apply business logic, I'm assuming. Let's go back. Man, that's something else. That's a class for React, for WebFlux. We don't need to know what is happening there. Let's run it again from that point forward. To apply business logic, right? We already went to receive API request, so it's going to apply business logic, get request data. Go to debug mode. So that's the request that we send. ID is no, so there's nothing there. Wait client, okay. So then it's saying request get data is not equals to no, or request that get data is empty. If it is empty, it's gonna go here. No, it didn't go there. It's not empty. Mono external call. There is no external call. We're not doing any external call. Data.query. Retrieve. Max attend 3 attempts. Transform defer it. Return external code data. we're going to remove this. Let's keep it simple for now. Let's remove the circuit breaker logic and also the Mongo repository for now. We want a simple with root template request and response process. Exclude a call to an external API as well. Show the project structure and files impacted. You know how this request response. This request is gonna have some changes. What else? Request. We could take this resiliency config for now also as well, and we could implement it after. Below is the outdated simplified version of API Flow. In this version, we remove circle breaker logic, MongoDB configuration, and reactive repository external API calls. The resulting application is a minimal bare bones WebFlux template that processes a request and returns a response. Yes, that's what we want for now. Revised project structure. Okay, this stays there, right? That's Maven configuration stuff. So this is what we care about. We leave that. API exposes the API endpoint. So we're going to have request, response, and service API. Business logic, validate, and echo input. The configuration, the properties. Going all the way to the bottom. I don't think nothing changed here, but let's go. API controller. The API controller, we're going to have API public mono response process API. So where is there's no more process path. It's okay. Oh yeah, it is real process. Wondering. Okay. It's the controller. API controller. And nothing much is gonna change here. It's the same thing. API service. So this is gonna change a thing, maybe. So mono apply business logic requests. Process requests with data. Request that get request data. Validate the request. If request that get request data equals no, and request that get request data is empty. Invalid request missing request data return mono that error. New illegal argument exception request data cannot be empty. So just checking if it is empty. For this, instead of using this format, can we just use that the validate API instead of using, can we instead use the validation dependency, Maven dependency? That is more, I don't know, efficient. Let's see what they said about that. And then return mono error. We're gonna return a response request data cannot be empty. For now, simply echo back the request data in the response. So response is equals new response. Response status process it. Response set response message echo request that get request data. Then just returns a response. The request data, we have an ID. We still left it for Mongo. Okay. Response. Application the properties. We need to set up our Mongo database. Okay. Sure, why not? Let's try this. Actually, let me pass this first. Mhm. Well, this is loading summary. Okay, actually, let's go back. Now it is responsive. So the updates in the pond.xml add the validation dependency, add the following dependency inside dependencies. So we are using a spring dash boot dash started dash validation. Aside from that, update the request model. So the request model is to have a collection. And then we put in that not blank message. Request data cannot be blank. You see how much easier this is. I think this is much easier than having all the code we had before. It's going to look cleaner now. So yeah, we need to update the requests. Explanation, the not blank at not blank annotation ensures that request data is neither null nor empty, ignoring white space, and a custom error message is provided if validation fails. Yep. If this happens to be empty, it will return this message. Update the API controller. Annotate the controller method's request parameter with at valid to trigger validation automatically. Okay. So it's the same thing as LS4J for logging, REST controller, request mapping, require arguments constructor, API server. So we had the process, request body at valid. So this will make sure that it is validated. That's what I'm assuming. Adding at valid to the request parameter triggers beam validation before the controller method is executed. You see, if validation fails, Spring Boot automatically returns a 400 bad request with details about the validation errors, eliminating the need for manual logging in the service layer. Yep. I mean, yeah, that's what we want to avoid. So this is the process API controller. So we have some updates. Okay, the API controller. What else? Update API service, optional changes. Since validation is now handled in the controller, you can remove or simplify manual checks in the service layer. Yeah, we want to do that. API service applies the business logic to process incoming requests. In this simplified version, it echoes back the request data, applies business logic to the incoming request, and returns a response. Request the validated request object and mono wrapping the response. Apply business logic, request, log info, processing requests with data, request that get request data. So what is the since validation is now handling the controller now? Okay, so this is gonna is there let's see what it looks like currently right now. We have the error. Yeah, that's why we wanted to remove these errors. So we no longer need that. Yeah, we forget about this now. Well, we don't need this either. I don't know why it was doing external call before, but okay. So let's grab this. So much smaller. Send response message. We probably need to update the response set response message. I think you forgot to make changes to the response class. We might need a method. Below is the outdated version of the response class, although Lombok's data annotation automatically generates the setter methods, including set response message. I have updated the explicit setter for clarity. No, it's necessary actually. I get it. I didn't know we had that, but then why is not picking it up? So let's check. You didn't have this, right? Response message. Let me see. Response. We have response data, not response message. And then do we still have status? Yes. There's a difference in the naming of the second variable. You will use please provide please provide commit message. Actually, not yet. First, let's test it. Okay. There's something here. Let's comment this out for now. We're not gonna need this. Okay. It's in the test class. Let's stop everything. I'm gonna run the application in debugger mode. It's running. Let's now the process. And now we are getting the response request data. Hello API flow. Status process. Response message echo. Hello API flow. So yeah, this looks good. Um, yes. Let me see. We don't need this file. I don't think we're calling this file right now. Is this a configuration? But for now, I'm gonna just comment it out. So we know right what we are actually using and what we are not. So we only need the WebFlux security configuration, right, where we disable security and we allowing any exchange of information to permit all. API controller. Update the API controller with that valid annotation. The Parta validation valid. So we're using that library. Still using a Mongo. We need to check that later if how the requests are actually coming up in Mongo database. And then we added this annotation, right? From Jakarta, I'm assuming. Jakarta, not blank. It made it so much cleaner, right, than what we had before. This we just saw recently, these two response, yeah, has data. So it has the getter and setter methods. And then API service. This is where we do apply our business logic. This is called by the controller. Response object, response status. We set the variables, right? Set the status. We set the response entity message to echo, and then the outcoming request, and then just return it. So this is looking good so far. Okay, and we made some change with this. We removed it for now. This could be running. It's not doing. It's not finding anything to execute, so it's fine. Then the palm. Look at the commits. These are all our files. So these are all the commits that we just recently reviewed. Please provide a commit review the latest changes versus the initial code base. So what we're gonna do is this. We're gonna go, so you can generate good changes, like you're gonna click here. This is the existing application we had, API flow. Existing. Okay. Now we're gonna create a new one. Then to zip drive. Latest changes. Okay, so we're gonna open both of these. Compare API dash flow dash existing changes versus API flow the latest changes to provide a commit message. I am getting a 200 status code. I'm getting a success response, successful response via Postman testing. Here first, feature model. Consolidate response model changes and API logic improvements. Merge improvements from the existing and latest code versions. Updated the response model to rely on Lombok. What is this? Yeah. Lombok's data for generating getter setters, including response message without custom implementations. Verify that the API endpoint returns the expected output, cleaning the redundant code and align it with clean code principles for clarity and maintainability. We did more than that. We did more than that. This part, accumulate that, commit messages provided before into a single commit. For example, previously, single commit and also review all changes we made between or the latest version and explain them concisely and effectively. Should be enough. Takes a while. So this is like the fastest. This is ChatGPT 03 mini high. Yeah, sometimes he breaks down. They simplify API flow template with integrated validation and streamlined business logic. Remove circuit breaker logic, external API calls, and Mongo repository to create a minimal. That is not true. We actually still left the Mongo repository. Create a minimal testable WebFlux template. Integrated beam validation by adding the Spring Boot started validation dependency. Started validation dependency and rotating the request model with not blank. Yes. Updated API controller to use at valid on the incoming request and for automatic validation. Simplified API service to validate and echo the request data as the response, adhering to clean code principles. That's a book, right? Clean code is a book, and we are. I instructed ChatGPT to basically follow the standards in the code, all the code that is getting generated. Create the response model to rely on Lambbox at data for generating getters and setters, ensuring consistency. Yes. Verify API endpoint functionality via Postman, which now returning this information. I think it's good, except that I'm going to remove the repository part, Mongo repository part. It's enough. It's only a commit, right? But I was trying to be as little as possible. It's only a commit. There's some warnings. What are the warnings? Where? Here. Blank line will be ignored. Where? This warning number cannot be replaced with method reference. I don't know about that, but that's not. Okay, so this pushes the call, and those updates should now be seen in the repository. So to see the repositories, you could go to github.com/data-analytic-AI. Then here we have the repositories, API flow. Actually, I have it as private. I need to make it public. Oh, no. Continue this later. Okay, but that's mainly it. Repository should now be public. Public. We should see the last commits, which were those, right? Minute ago. What happened in this? That's all we have. So it's gonna be the repository. We'll start here for now. And let's see when I get back some other time. Maybe today, maybe another day. But we'll start here for